welcome to Aspyr Cast. I'm super excited to have Dr. Steve Joordens here with us today. Is it okay if I call you Dr. Joordens, Steve, whatever you're comfortable
Steve's
with?
fine. Yeah,
Perfect.
all good.
So Steve is a psychology professor at University of Toronto Scarborough and has done some amazing work in using tech to make learning more engaging and interactive. From tools like Peer Scholar and which lets students give other feedback, to also recently Talk Lab, which helps students build their conversation skills, which we're gonna talk about further.
Fantastic.
So Steve is all about helping students grow, basically. So today we'll actually just dive into his journey in psychology, talk about his projects, and get his take on how technology is changing education.
Cool.
Steve, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Amazing. So psychology seems to be like kind of touching every part of everyone's life, from like how we learn to how we connect with others.
Yeah.
So what actually got you interested in psychology in the first place, and how did you end up focusing on educational tech?
Yeah. So kind of interesting. I was avoiding university for many years, but I took what was called a telecourse at the time, where you could watch a course on TV and had mail-in assignments and stuff, and it was an introductory psychology course. So I took that once, and I just found it, like you said, it just touched on so much. There were so many interesting things where kind of section after section of the course, it's like, now it's something totally different, but that's kind of cool too, and that's kind of cool. And at that point in time, I wanted to be a music producer. So when I finally went to university, I had the feeling by then that if I could learn psychology better, then when bands came into the studio, my job would be to kind of get the best out of them musically, and that psychology would help me do that. Even just by like forming good relationships, kind of getting a trust relationship going, I thought that was critical. So I simultaneously took psychology and computer science, which sort of has become the track of my life, it turns out, of having one foot in technology, one foot in psychology. Followed that through, and was largely on that path until I met this professor.
Yeah, so following on with that, so I was going to ask you, like, if there was any one or anything on your way that actually pushed you in this direction, and you mentioned a professor. Could you just expand on that a little?
Professor Wayne Donaldson, who I know well, and I still see now and then. He lives up by the Lake Simcoe, and every now and then we'll take our motorbikes up and go visit. He and his wife. He was teaching cognition, and he taught in a way different than, he assessed in a way different than anybody I'd been to. We'd learn about all these experiments in the course, and then on the test he would show 6 figures or tables, and he would say something like, pick 4 of them and tell me why the experiment was run. So what's the theory, what was manipulated, tell me everything you can remember about the experiment, tell me what the results were, and then he would say, and tell me what you would do next if you were the scientist. So that was the sort of interesting part. And I love these exams. It felt to me like, okay, I don't have to memorize all these details. I have to know studies. I like experiments. So I wrote those exams, and at one point he took me aside and he said, when your exams, what would you do next? He said, a lot of the things you propose are really good ideas about what to do next. You think like a scientist. And I thought this was an interesting, I've carried this with me throughout my life, that every now and then it can be so powerful when you see something in somebody else that they don't see, to just mention it and say, hey, by the way, you're really good at X. Do you know you're really good at X? And in that case, he told me, you should think about going to graduate school. You should think about getting involved in research. But I was trying to cram a 4-year degree into 3.5 years. And he said, your marks are not good enough that way. You had to relax. You got to take an extra year, do it in 4.5 years, get your grades up, and go to grad school. And for whatever reason, I just listened to him. He seemed like an interesting dude. He seemed to know what he was talking about. So it just changed the trajectory of my life. And I started getting involved in research and loved it.
So now that you're looking back, is there anything just about your journey that kind of surprised you or took you in a direction you didn't really expect?
Well, I think what I take from it, and I tell my students a lot, is when you go into something like university, I think it's really good to have a plan. But I think it's also good to be willing to give up that plan. And I think this is generally, as you know, I have sort of one foot in entrepreneurship now too. And what you learn in that startup business is, have an idea that you think is great, push it, But if it's not working, be really quick to pivot. So there's that term pivot, like, oh, if that's not going, maybe you can tweak something and find something that's better. And for students, I say the same thing. Like, if you want to be a dentist, great. Go to school, start being a dentist. But don't close your heart and your mind to other things that suddenly might pop up. Maybe you take a philosophy course and it's like, who knew? I love philosophy, and this is what I want to spend my life doing. And so, that notion of when you are 30 years down the road and the alarm clock goes off and you're waking up and you're thinking, oh, I got to go to work. Is that like, I got to go to work? Or is that, oh, I'm in the middle of this study and we're going to take this next step? If you pick well, you're not going to feel the, you're going to feel like, okay, this is cool. And I think that's important for students. That we always think of money. You want something that'll give you a job, but you also want something that you really enjoy doing, and keeping your radar up, feeling that resonance if something comes up, and being willing to say, yeah, I was going this way, but now I'm going that way, I think is really smart. I think when you're 20 years down the road, you're thankful that you took that turn.
Are you enjoying what are you doing?
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, my biggest challenge right now, I'll be honest with you, is my wife's older than I am. She's retired. And so I've got this clock and I don't want to go beyond 65. I'm 59 now. And it feels like things are coming together now, like the reputation I've built and everything is coming together with AI. And we'll talk about some of the things going on with AI, meeting important people that can help some of these. It just feels like everything's coming together, and I've got 6 years to kind of have a positive impact. And so, yeah, if anything, I feel a little apprehensive about trying to be able to do everything I want to do in the time that I have. So I wake up ready to go quite often and just thinking about, okay, what do we got to attack today?
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So peer feedback, just at least for my case especially, it has been really valuable in my learning experiences because it's an add-on to the feedback that you can get from your teacher or professor.
Right.
So with Peer Scholar, you've created a way for students to learn from each other.
Right.
So what was the initial idea behind it?
Yeah, well, there's sort of two. There's a few sort of things that come together, but there's a bigger idea called peer learning, which is a number of different things that show that sometimes students are better teaching students than professors are. In the classic example, the professor, I think it's a physics class, and he puts some problem up that he knows people will get about 50% right. And so he asks people to vote, about 50% get it right. And then he says, okay, I'm just going to be quiet for a while. I want you guys to form groups with whoever's around you and explain why you think your answer was right to your group. And it turns out the students who got it right understood the question, understood why, but they were very good at explaining to the others why that was right. And he could just ask the question again 5 minutes later, and it would be like 80 or 90% right. And what he talked about was the curse of knowledge, that when you're a professor, you know things so deeply and for so long, it's just like, and it can be hard to explain that to somebody who hasn't quite crossed that bridge. But a student who's just crossed that bridge knows what it's like to sort of be on both sides, and sometimes is better able to explain it. So there's that. There's peer learning. The other thing I loved about peer feedback, first of all, is just giving students experience giving the feedback, because it's hard. Giving feedback well, it's tricky. It's so easy to do it wrong if you have any judgmentalism or any the wrong tone, and now suddenly the person's you're going to rouse their fight-flight reflex. They're not going to want to learn from you. So you have to learn how to be respectful communicator of information the person might not like to hear. But the other thing I love is when you're on the receiving end, I can say to students, you don't have to trust peer feedback. AI is almost like this now too. It'll give you information, but don't trust it. It's a offer to think critically. So if an instructor tells you, you should be doing X or Y, it's kind of like, okay, I should be doing X or Y. If a peer tells you that, it's like, should I be doing X or Y? And so it's almost like a stimulus to get you critically thinking and reflecting. And that's what I like to kind of have students doing. And so by telling them, hey, here's 5 students giving you advice. Some of them are great, some of them not so good. It's up to you now to think about it and make your own decisions and then do what you think is right. I like noisy feedback. I like that you have to fight through the noise and find the signal yourself.
So you would say that we're obviously going to have some students that are open to the feedback, but also some that are not. But also the ones that are not open, it's also good for them.
Yeah, I mean, there's a book by Carol Dweck called The Growth Mindset, and she talks about certain people. Michael Jordan is an example she talks about. I think Bill Gates is an example she talks about. Certain people who've gone on to do really well, who seem to be natural at having what we call a growth mindset. If they always want to get better, they continually think that their current performance is just where they're at now, but they want to be better tomorrow than they are today. And so they're continually looking for feedback. What's something I could think about that might actually make me better? So they're kind of hungry for it, and they're able to get by the judgmental part of it, where, almost for someone to say how you can be better, they have to start by saying how you're not perfect now. There's something to be improved. And for many of us, we're not Michael Jordans. We're not Bill Gates. For many of us, when we get somebody saying, okay, here's what's not so great about your draft, it triggers this natural, it causes a threat, it triggers a fight flight, and we feel an emotional. We feel embarrassed, we feel annoyed, we feel frustrated, and we don't want to listen to it. We want to fight what they're saying or flee what they're saying. I had to go through graduate school and have my supervisor continually throw back papers at me and say, not good enough, getting better, but not good enough, not good enough. And I would, go through those emotional states. Then I would revise it and it would be better. And it's almost like for many of us, we have to go through that journey of hearing somebody tell us something we don't like, feeling annoyed by it, getting past the annoyance, doing what they say, and then feeling like, oh, you know what? I am better. I did learn something. And that's a hard journey, and I don't think it's one that should be reserved for graduate school. I think it should be an undergrad, and that's, first year undergrad, I want to start having students experiencing that emotional journey, getting past the emotion, getting to the message, and realizing, hey, I got a better mark on this assignment because I was able to fight through that process of learning from feedback.
Okay, so how exactly has Peer Scholar actually changed over the years as like you've seen how students and like even instructors use it? I'm just like curious to know if there's any updates based on like the feedbacks from people using it, either on the receiving end or the front end.
Yeah, wow, it's changed so much. In the early days, it was just, we didn't even understand the educational value we had. We wanted more writing in our big classes, and we couldn't afford all the TA hours to grade all the writing. And so we were saying, wow, what if we had students do some of the assessment? Maybe they would gain from being part of the assessment. And we did a study that showed if you had 6 students kind of, apply a rubric to some pieces, the average of those 6 students was actually a very good grade. It correlated very well with what teachers and such would show. So early on, it was kind of a means to an end. Oh, we can get writing assignments back, which is good. But eventually we started focusing on that third step, learning from feedback that you and I were all talking about, and we instituted that and really supported that. We started adding those micro-learning videos along the way to kind of really help the student understand the difficulty of the task, but also what good performance looks like, how to give good feedback. So we tried to support the students more. We added a lot of teamwork functionality now because we think it's more important than ever for students to be thrust into a world with strangers and to find their way of how to interact with those strangers and do something together. And of course, now it's all about AI. How do we take what's going on in Peer Scholar, but a lot of the standard things done in Peer Scholar, students can use AI to do at least reasonably well. You can use it to summarize a paper. You can use it to give feedback to work. And so how do we make sure we still have what we call assessment validity? And what we mean by that is, how do we know that the students who do well in Peer Scholar are the students we want to do well, the students that are engaging in the process right? And so in a world of AI, that's a challenge across the board for us to figure out how to assess. But we've come up with some neat ways of bringing it into Peer Scholar. And I'll just give you just a taste to give you a feel. In Peer Scholar Future, probably next fall, when students come in, they'll be asked to do something, let's say summarizing experiment, but there'll be a little button there that says create draft with AI. And so they'll click the button, there's the draft. Their task is now to make that draft better. And so what we'll look at is, what was the draft that was generated and what did they finally submit? Because they will be told the AI is kind of, you got to check it through, you got to make it better, you got to make it all yours, and we'll guide them through how to edit an AI created piece. And they'll have to do a little submission piece that says, here's what I changed and here's why I changed it. So sort of a think aloud, here's what I did. So the task now becomes not write from scratch, but work with AI to produce something that's really good, better than AI could do on its own. And similarly, when you're giving feedback, you press a button, here's some feedback. Now improve that feedback. And so we're going to try to make it much more simulate the way we think students will work with AI outside the class and in the work environment. But we have to change the whole feel of the task, the journey a little bit. But that's sort of the fun now, is figuring out how to do that.
Would this idea that you have that's going to be implemented by next fall, would that actually make them be better editors? Or maybe just or you're aiming to make them better just understanding of the actual concept of the course? Because I was just thinking, okay, maybe that's just gonna push them to be able to edit the drafts better and not necessarily understand the topic.
Yeah, I mean, this becomes the worry, right? When AI can do what it can do so well from scratch, this is where so many instructors, you see half the instructors not willing to give up on writing from scratch. And it's the reasons that you're describing. That's where the people get their understanding and structure all their logic. And there's so much that we love about writing as educators and have for hundreds and hundreds of years. Are we ready to just say that's dead, that AI, and some instructors aren't. They'll say, you cannot use AI for anything in this course. I want you to write from scratch. And I get it. It just, to me, doesn't seem realistic. It's just not. It's putting students in a very uncomfortable position. They've got this thing right beside them that can do that for them. And it's like, don't touch that thing. Whatever you do, don't touch it. And it's like so easy, and the prof will never know, and we can't detect it very well. And it's just this awkward position. And so do we alternately accept that writing from scratch is dead? And I've got some presentations where I have a headstone that says writing from scratch dead 2024. Is it dead? And do we have to give up on that? And do we have to find different ways of assessing what you're talking about? And I think there is. Now I think you're right. The peer scholar thing I just laid out to you is more teaching you how to work with AI, and use it to do what it's good at, and then you do what you need to make it truly good. We will need other ways of assessing learning, and I've got some thoughts on that too, that will get at the deep understanding. Like, does a student really get what they're learning and how well? But I think everything, what AI has done, it's really, those who know Thomas Kuhn in the sciences, Thomas Kuhn talked about this whole notion of a paradigm shift in the sciences, where every now and then something happens, from Isaac Newton to Einstein, for example, that causes a complete change in the methods and the approaches that scientists take to some problem. Education is in a paradigm shift right now. We can no longer assess with online multiple choice tests. Everybody gets 100%. We can not do anything online untimed. You can have essay questions that AI can answer. And so suddenly we have to think about, okay, do we whine and cry about what we can't do anymore? Or do we look at AI and say, but are you allowing us to do things we couldn't do before? And maybe some of what's now possible is better than what we've been doing all these years. And so I'm always trying to look at that. So I talk about a continuum between fear and opportunity that runs through wonder, that you have to play with the AI. Once you start to become wondrous of what it's able to do, you start to see opportunities of how to use it. And that's sort of where I feel like we are right now, right in the middle of that transition.
So, for example, specifically talking about research.
Yeah.
So let's say, even when you did your PhD and had to do your research, write your own papers, you obviously didn't have access to these AIs. You had to actually,
so much easier now. It's so much easier now. Yep.
So there's obviously going to be a difference from people like you who actually had to do their own proper research and write a paper from scratch, from these people that are basically graduating right now and have access to all of these citing AIs, writing AIs, editing AIs and such.
Yeah.
So is this actually not making the new graduates lack these skills, and eventually when they go in the workplace or the teaching stream, their lack of skills kind of have the students in a disadvantage?
I mean, this is the weird place we're at, where the counter to that will be, but do you need those skills? Which is a scary thing to ask, because you think, yeah, those seem like really valuable skills, but will they be things that are needed in the following workplace? So let me give you a couple of analogies. This is one my postdoc loves. So apparently, before the days of photography, most artists, and by that I mean like paintbrush kind of artists, would do portrait artistry, and they would be hired by families, and they'd be hired by people to come in and do a portrait of grandpa or a portrait of the family or whatever, and there was a huge business. Photography came in, and that just went away. You know, a photographer could come in at a much cheaper price and capture a much more realistic image in a much shorter time with less hassle and everything, and suddenly portrait photography became just a little niche kind of thing. Is that skill still valuable? Well, yeah, sort of. But what we saw is that art went to abstract art and things that you couldn't do in photographs. It went to more creative, interesting ways of expressing that talent. And so, you know, we have the calculator comes in, and suddenly people can't do math anymore. But I used to be able to do math in my head really, really well. Is that a loss? You know, is that a horrible thing that people can't do math in their head anymore? And so I think we're at a point now where it's much more core, because it feels like writing from scratch was about, for example, if we go back to my PhD days, it was like, first of all, how much do you even know the literature? And so in order to, like right now, you can almost create a scientific article and say, here's a story I want to tell. And then you can ask AI for each step, can you find me a study that says this, what I want to say here? And can you find me one that says what I want to say here? And then you can almost look like you have all these studies that tell that story. Whereas back in my day, you had to go to conferences, you had to talk to people, you had to attend talks, you had to read journals, and you still felt like when you were submitting a paper, you might have missed something. And somebody who reviews your paper might say, wow, you're not very scholarly. You didn't cite Andrews 72, and that's core to your work. And suddenly you look, you know, not very good. Whereas that's all gone. But is that, where does that put us? And I think we don't always know the answer to that. We can feel the things we're losing. It's harder to see the things we could be gaining. That's where we need the more visionary kind of people to say, yeah, but maybe science should work this way in the future, and maybe that would be better. I don't know what that is right now. So right now it does feel like a loss. The way you just like kind of laid that out, I think, wow, the current scientists will have missed something that I feel is valuable. But I don't know if I can put my finger on why. Because even my way, it's not like my way was better papers. You were subject to the group of papers you knew, the people you knew, you know, you kind of did that. Whereas now AI just will look at anything. You just say, hey, what do we know about X? And it'll show you everything all at once. So suddenly you can know, even things that don't exist, by the way. So suddenly you can know, you know, about, you can be a fully scholar person without really having read or done much. Is that horrible? Will people end up with better papers because it covers more of the literature? I don't know. I think we're in that sort of assessment phase. Like, what impact is this having, and figuring that out?
Would you say all of these AI advancements, especially in, like, you know, whether it's learning, writing, researching and such, is it actually making people not think as much?
It could. So this is where we need the vision, and we need the alternative. So to be concrete, I have an idea I have to throw out there just so that we can be a little, because we can talk about the things that are lost, but let's talk a little bit about things that are gained. One of the things I realized, I'm an assessment geek. So Peer Scholar is about assessing. It's what's called assessment for learning. And when I look at how we assess, so first of all, the thing I absolutely hate is multiple choice exams. And of course, in my course, there's a big multiple choice exam at the end of the course, and that's how, and we figure that's the best we have only because we have students in a room where we know they can't have access to technology. So, okay, here we can actually see what the student knows. But the multiple choice test exposes students to incorrect information. Often it doesn't tell them when they pick incorrect stuff, and so they're left thinking, oh, maybe that was right. And we know it just assesses sort of a shallow learning. How much can this person memorize? And you've highlighted, for example, an ability to think in certain ways, and for certain skills that may be lost or not. What if we want to make sure they can still think? What if we want to make sure they do have certain skills and they are developing them? What we need is an assessment that is sensitive to those skills, so that when we assess the student, those who have the skills do better. What would that look like? And this is what I start thinking of that opportunity. And so I asked myself at one point, what's the best form of assessment I've ever seen? And my model comes from sitting down, talking to a graduate student from Britain that told me that she would go and she would see her supervisor almost never, but she would go and the supervisor would say, oh, okay, you want to understand memory. Here's a list of 30 books. Go away. Go read these books, learn everything you can. And then come back at some point, and I'm going to spend like 2 hours with you, and I am going to ask you questions. I'm basically going to interrogate you. Almost imagine a court system where you're up there and someone's hitting you with all this stuff. But I'm going to ask you, about information at various depths. I'm going to see how deep you can go on something. And I'm also going to maybe ask you about skills. Maybe I'll ask you, signal detection theory was something they used in math. If you had this hit rate and this false alarm rate, what would be the D prime? Which maybe makes no sense to anybody listening, but it's a skill, and we could see, do you have that skill? We could ask you to think critically about some things. We could ask you to think creatively. We could ask you about sort of citizenship kind of stuff. Whatever we think is important, whatever we would like to teach, this person, could ask questions and assess, and then you leave and they say, okay, this is how well they knew it. That's the best approach. Pre-AI, it just doesn't scale. We just don't have enough experts to do this with IntroPsych, 2,000 students, who are they going to sit down with? How's this going to work? But with a properly created AI that does what that assessor does, if we could train an AI to ask those questions, to follow up in the right way, to tap the skills, and this is something I call a holistic assessment of learning. Holistic meaning you try to capture everything you value. So HAL, which is sort of a 2001 Space Odyssey reference. But if we could create that, then I think that's my answer to some of your other questions. So why would students ever care about learning these skills or picking up these skills? Well, if they know that's what their grade depends on, if they know that after they spent some time in a learning environment, they're going to sit with this robot that's going to cross-examine them and give them a grade, then they're going to put the time and effort into learning those things. And so that becomes the challenge now, I think, is sort of getting rid of essays, getting rid of multiple choice exams, reimagining a different way of assessing learning. And if we can assess the learning right, the assessment drives what happens in the classroom. People teach to the test. And so if the test really is what we want it to be, then the teaching will be what we want it to be as well. So, yeah. Was
that kind of the core idea behind Talk Lab?
So Talk Lab is sort of a step along the way. So HAL is the big dream.
Yeah.
HAL is it's going to take some time and effort to get there. And of course, one of the steps of that is you have to have an agent that you can talk with in a very human-like way. And so that's really what Talk Lab is about. It's trying to solve, I don't even want to call it a smaller problem because it's such a huge problem on campus, which is the social anxiety that so many students feel that's preventing them from making friends and getting social connection. I think it's a really critical issue now. But in building that for Talk Lab, we're starting to build HAL. We're starting to get the example. And for example, within Talk Lab, at some point, we will soon have an agent that is HAL-like, that you can talk to for a while, and it'll try to talk to you in different ways, and it'll give you a score. It'll ultimately say, hey, your conversational skills right now are at about a 70. If you want it to be an 80, keep coming back. Try this activity. Try that activity. So it's a chance for us to do a small HAL, so to speak. But eventually, our goals are like every standardized tests you see in schools and stuff, we'd like them all to be that kind of oral examination with an AI.
So just following up with that, I just asked a question so you want to basically implement this idea into the school system, whether it's like secondary, post-secondary.
Yep.
So it obviously is going to require a lot of resources from the institutions. So how would you say these institutions would actually come up with those resources to be able to implement it?
So resources and sort of a willingness to try crazy new things, which is sort of my thing, right? So my class is continually me trying things that sometimes blow up and sometimes don't. That is that sort of entrepreneurial mindset that some people have and many people don't have. Many people like to come up with a way of doing something. They get comfortable in that way of doing something, and change is stressful, etc. And so how can you get a whole school system or a global school system to change the way it's doing things? It's step one, relationships is what I'm saying. So I, for example, am working now with the TCDSB especially, and the superintendent there named Lori DeMarco, who's in charge of sort of undergraduate enhancements. And they want teachers teaching AI in every class, which 10 to 20% of the teachers are really excited about. And 80% of teachers are like, ugh, I don't need this, right? And so then the trick is how to get those 80% on board. And so I'm helping Lori and some of the teachers sort of negotiate that challenge through use cases. We could talk about all the details of that. But in the process, I'm creating these relationships. And the most critical thing to change is relationships of trust, and not trying to coming into the school system and saying, hey, I've got this new way, it's going to make all your things better, it's going to get rid of all the bias in your stuff and make equitable. And it's like, yeah. But if I've been there working with them, getting to know them, helping them solve problems, and over some time they think, hey, this guy might sort of know what he's talking about, I think that's so critical. And so it can take years of laying down trust relationships with groups. And then you got to get the snowball rolling. So if you get one district to say, let's try it, and that district has success, especially if it's something like TCDSB or TDSB, for example, which is the biggest school board in Canada, well, then you get the other ones watching and saying, okay, that looks pretty cool, I'll try that. And so you got to build the snowball, get it bigger and bigger, and you're right, it takes a lot of time. It sometimes takes money. You have to have teachers often that are going to try this that maybe need relief from something else because they're spending time on this. And so you have to, that's where science comes in, really. As we do these things, we do the research and we publish the papers. And then when we're going to decision makers, we're saying, look, it works. Look, I can show you it works. And I can show you how this solves a problem that's core to your system. And with the science behind it, they're usually willing to try. And then it's all a question of how does that implementation go? You can have the best idea in the world. If it doesn't smoothly integrate into the class, then you got to work on that issue.
You mentioned doing like quote unquote like some experiments with your like students in your classes
continually.
Yeah. One of them that I heard about probably a few years ago was that like, correct me if I'm wrong with any of the specifics, that like there was a student that like you had this interaction with them and they started crying or something, and then they just kind of like ran out of the classroom. Then you kind of waited to see the reaction of other students. Like probably, if I'm not wrong, it was like the way that you talked to the person or something.
So I think that's urban legend. I think so. I mean, I've certainly had students cry, but if you're suggesting that this was an experiment that was set up where somebody went running out crying, so I don't tend to do that. So I wouldn't. We teach early on, although my students just kind of did an experiment like that in class the other day. But we teach early on that for any formal research project, you have to have consent of all those involved and things like that. And so I would never do something. I do encourage them to do something to their biology prof. I encourage them to use shaping principles to push the prof to lecture from a corner. That's more them trying it with their learning in class and giving it a go. But that kind of experiment, no. More typically, when students are going through projects that I'm doing, there may be things we're manipulating in the background. There could be, for example, exposure to certain videos or different videos that we think this video is better than that video, but we're not sure, and so we want to give half the students one, half the students the other, see what changes. So it's formal research. It's all consent form. Will you allow us to use your data? So that kind of stuff I do a lot of. Just these sort of fun, let's muck with the student's head in class, not so much. Although I will mention that when Sam came to class, so Sam Ibrahim, who the Sam Ibrahim building is named after, he came to give lectures to class. One of the students took one of the sections of the class, and for whatever reason, she put all the tables down in that section, and she wanted to do a little experiment. Would the people that normally sit there not sit there if it looked kind of weird or strange? And at first that was true, but then people started sitting there anyway because they always sat there, and we have this attraction to the chair we like. We want to go back to that chair. And so anyway, she was mucking around. She told me ahead of time, and I'm like, well, okay, let's see what happens. That's fine. That's no harm done. But that example, no. I have had students crying. I had a student actually pass out during a stats exam when I taught stats. Okay. Just kind of flake out totally. Those things are tricky sometimes when you're
Nothing
teaching.
on purpose, though.
It wasn't on purpose. No, she hadn't, by the way, let's just throw this out as exam season. She hadn't eaten well. And this is a thing that happens to a lot of students. They get stressed out about exams and they change their sleeping habits and they change their eating habits, which are the two worst things to change. The best thing you can do in exam season is get a consistent bedtime wake up and eat well. Keeps your brain functioning, keeps the sugar level that you need in there. And if you don't eat enough sugars, that's what happened with her. She hadn't eaten most of the day. She was in a stats exam. You can feel dizzy, confused, and she ultimately passed out. And we just had to get some sugars into her, really.
Did she continue the exam afterwards, or?
I don't think she did. I think she had a chance to rewrite later or something. But I think her parents came to take her. That was a few years ago. That was when I taught stats.
Okay.
But yeah, these things happen for sure.
Yeah, of course. So we kind of touched on Talk Lab, but not that much. So could you just briefly tell us about Talk Lab and how it actually helps students build their conversational skills?
Yeah, we'll see. I hope so. So here's a little bit of the background. So we know how important social connection is. If there was one gift we could give every student that came to university, it would be like 2 good friends. 2 or 3 really good friends in your life, the ones that you really care about and that really care for you. That makes all the difference in your physical health. Like literally people without those friends are more susceptible to viruses, all sorts of things. But also the mental health, they're more susceptible to anxiety, depression. But if you have that group of people, you feel you're insulated against a lot of these stresses. You're able to meet them. And we know you have higher rates of success, higher rates of happiness, higher rates of mental health, all good. And so, I have a friend who's the head of the GenWell initiative, and he's all about social connection. And sometimes I feel like he doesn't understand the depth of the problem, or in the following sense. He feels like he just has to show people how important social connection is, and they'll see it, and they'll go, oh, okay, I got to do more of that. And at one level, that's absolutely true. At the other level, there's this other weird thing that's crept in over decades, which is just high levels of social anxiety and high levels of what we call fear of negative evaluation. And we think social media is part of it. There's a lot of judging yourself compared to others on social media. And there's also a whole lot to do with text messaging that students like asynchronous messages. They like to be able to think about something. It's come in, let me think, let me draft a response, let me think about that, let me decide what emoticon to write, and then fire it back. And so they like having lots of time, and they're worried about that other person judging them very highly. And so this has made it really hard for students to do what you and I are doing right now, to just, especially with a stranger, especially with someone they don't know, just saying, hey, you're a fellow university student, any chance we could chat? And we know if they could do that more, if they felt more comfortable, they would make those friends. We know that, by the way, everybody thinks if they do that, it's going to go badly 90% of the time. It goes well 90% of the time for both parties. Usually that other person is as sort of isolated and lonely. Those are strong terms, but they're feeling similarly detached and would like a friend. And we feel like they wouldn't. And so there's this barrier that makes it really hard for students to interact with each other. And I think part of that is simple lack of practice. They just, compared to my generation who had no social media, who had no text messages, the only way we could communicate was real time. It was all there was. And so that means we practiced it. By the time we were 17, we practiced it a lot compared to the current generation. And so
it's more like sociological than, is there any like biological effects?
So I always question, we hear the biological, like for example, the classic one is that you guys have no attention span anymore. Like we have this huge attention span and somehow yours is shrunk in a generation. Everything we know about biology doesn't change like that. Like it just doesn't. It takes generation after generation after generation. There's nothing wrong with your attention spans except you carry distraction machines in your pocket. So it's not that you can't focus. If you could get rid of all your distractions, you could focus just as well as anybody else. But you've grown up in a world where your mind is continually being grabbed by the environment, continually being grabbed by your phone, by notifications that are coming in, especially the phone. And you've kind of learned to accept this sort of distracted way of living. And so I don't think that's biology. I think that's more the environment. It's more that the environment is now continually pulling your mind away from focusing on a task. It's doing it to me too. I mean, I feel I can't sometimes go from an email. I have an intention to do something on a web browser. By the time I'm getting over there, something's caught my eye on the web browser, and sometimes I get to that and I'm like, what am I doing? Like that was enough that little thing that I saw was enough to get my mind off the task. And so we live in that world, and you guys have sort of grown up in that world, and face-to-face conversations are almost the antithesis of all of that. Like, you can't be distracted. And this is, even office hours. I have office hours. It's a bunch of black screens, right? And it's like, where's the give and take? And a lot of it is the nonverbals. And that's what I worry, is that because of that lack of practice, there is... Okay, I'm going to have to back up on you now. So if there's one psychological theory I would suggest everyone check on, it's something called self-determination theory. And it says, in order for us to embrace something, to really enjoy something, there's sort of three things that have to be true of that thing. One is it has to feed our autonomy. We have to see the value of doing that. And so we can think of this even in a course. Say an instructor is going to ask you to do something. A lot of times we say, why are we doing that? What's the benefit? How is this going to benefit me? And if there's a good answer to that, here's how it's going to benefit you. Okay, now we're a little more interested. We see the value. The second one is the one I'm going to hype on, and it's competence. We have to feel like we know what to do and how to do it reasonably well, even if it's a little outside of our current skill set. If it's described to us clearly enough what we need to do, then we're like, okay, let me stretch. I know where you want me to stretch. Let me do that. When I talked about the videos in Peer Scholar, the first one's always autonomy. Why should you learn how to give feedback? The next ones are about competence. Why is it hard to give feedback, and how do you do it well? And so by giving students that, they're like, okay, I now get what he wants. I feel competent. I feel ready to do this. The third factor, by the way, is relatedness, feeling like you're together with others in this endeavor. When it comes to face-to-face communications, I think it's competence, that a lot of students feel like, I don't know how to do this very well, because they haven't had a lot of practice. We feel that like guitar. If you've only practiced a little bit, you're like, I don't know how to play guitar very well. And so how do we get them comfortable enough to have those discussions? And Talk Lab kind of combines two things. The first one is safe practice. Can you practice without feeling like that person is judging you? Again, I will talk about my grad student Adam here, because he's got these great analogies. And he says, if you're learning piano, imagine you had to learn piano with somebody watching you every minute when you were practicing. You probably wouldn't enjoy practicing, because you'd probably feel like, crap, I'm no good at this, and this person's watching me. And you don't like people watching you when you're not very good at something. But that's why you learn an instrument quietly by yourself. And then when you're good enough, then you start presenting it to others. And so that notion in Talk Lab is, okay, let's teach you some basics. How do you start a conversation? How do you end a conversation? How can you use active listening to get a conversation to go deeper than the weather, to go to something reasonable? How can you use tips from improv comedy to kind of help a conversation flow along, especially when it hits sort of dead spots where there's awkward silences? And so we teach these things, but more important than that, we say, now there's these agents that we've created that are ultra human. They have a whole emotion system behind them. You can now practice. You can talk to this agent, and you can see how it goes. Try to start a conversation. Try to use active listening to go deeper. Try to do all these things. And this agent is not judging you. It's just a robot sitting there. And so you can sort of try things out without anybody watching, so to speak. And the claim and the hope is that students will embrace this, they'll see the value, and they'll spend a lot of time practicing these different skills we learn. We're also so with Talk Lab, we're also going to release access to an application called OOT. So OOT was not created by our lab, and OOT, by the way, is making fun of the Canadian way of saying things. So like if we want to go oot in a boot, when other people say we say that. I don't think we say that, but anyway, they say that's what the Canadian accent is. So OOT is like sort of out, get out. And what OOT will do is it's a simple app where students can check in, and when you check in, you're basically saying, hey, I'm open to have a conversation if anybody wants. And so you can see the other people that are checked in. They're geotagged, so you can see where they are relative to you. And a little bit of information about their interests is available, including shared interests with you. So I could potentially say, oh, Aiden's in Tim Hortons and he likes Formula One. Okay, I don't know this guy, but I like Formula One. And it's sort of making those first steps. He's open to conversation. First of all, I'm not going to be bothering him if I go over and say hi. He's already said I'm open for conversation. And I can talk about the Formula One race that's coming up this weekend, because I know he's probably thinking about that too. So we can get things rolling. We can, get over that first hump. And so the overall hope is talk lab to give you some sort of simulation practice, feeling like, okay, I think I can do this. I know some tips and tricks. And then OOT to say, let me bring this into the real world and let me see if I can make some friends using these tricks and tips. If we can get a few more friends for every student, that's a powerful, powerful thing.
So have students that have been using Talk Lab shared any experiences with the Talk Lab that actually helped them in the real world conversations?
So this is early days. We are literally, I think today, going to really release it. So we haven't released the full platform. All we've released so far is a digital version of me in the course.
There was one previous to that too. I forgot the name.
We've to make a splash, we threw out Alex. So
right.
Alex, yeah. So I mean, there's a fun story behind Alex to kind of get the idea of it. When AIs came out, and you could speak to them, you could interact with them, but so many of them are what are called the helpful assistant, and so they're very submissive. They just want to help. You can be nasty to them, and they'll take it and say I'm sorry and blah blah blah. And we thought this is not a good conversation practice thing. It's just too easy. You can't go wrong when you're talking to that. So we had to try to take that helpful assistant, but make it into a real human being. And we decided to go a little the other way to start with and to say, can we create, and Alex we call our angsty teen, can we create a human that doesn't really want to talk to you at all and is in a bad mood and says very little in response to things? And why would you create that? So almost the opposite of a helpful assistant. Well, because when we're teaching people conversation skills, we like to have different levels. Like, sure, talk to some easy people to talk to, but here's someone challenging. Can you actually get Alex to kind of enjoy and having a conversation with you? And you're going to have to get past a bunch of his snarkiness to kind of get there. And so that was, we kind of threw it out there to show how human and non-helpful assistant we could have an AI conversation be. And we knew, by the way, we have parents all over the world who tried Alex and say, this is what it's like to talk to my teenage kid. This is exactly like my teenage kid.
How did you actually get like different people, like parents, to use the?
We just threw it out there on LinkedIn. Okay. So on LinkedIn and some other. I mean, I'm social media wise, I'm not on all these platforms. I'm much more professional. So for me, it was more LinkedIn. But I think Adam threw it out on a few others, and we just kind of threw it out there and let people react and comment. And the whole idea then was, we find ourselves in a weird place. By the way, we were building these agents to create Talk Lab to solve this problem of social connection. Somehow, we got ahead of the AI folks, and we're still ahead of the AI folks. Our conversational bots are better than the most recently released, although they're getting pretty good on OpenAI and stuff. They're getting pretty good as well. But ours are still better. Ours have better emotional reactivity. If you disrespect our agents, they will walk out on you. They will not take it. They are human beings. They act like human beings.
Is it going to be fixed by like a refresh of the website, or is it more like you got to give it some days to? So
I mean, it's fascinating, and I think as psychology students, and I have to highlight Adam Frost, because Adam Frost is really the AI brains behind what we're doing. And and this is how psychology and technology can kind of mix. There's a theory of emotion, and anybody can look it online, called the circumplex of emotions. And what it says, it's a circle, but what it says is there's two axes. One is how high arousal is, and the other is the valence of the message, if it's positive or negative. So based on those two things, like for example, sadness would be a lower arousal version of anger. Both of them are negative emotions, but anger is a, full of energy, negative emotion, whereas sadness is a low energy, negative emotion. Depression would be even a lower energy. And so you have this circle where almost every emotion can be a point on this valence by arousal cross. So what Adam has is, when the human is speaking to the agent, another agent is assessing the tone to get the valence, and we've had tonal analysis available for a long time through AI. So it can tell how positive or negative you're being, and it can tell how energetic you're being, how much arousal there is. And so it's like the bot can now sense your emotion, and it reacts to your emotion. So if you're being nice and friendly and helpful, or even, for example, Alex, for any of you guys who have a link to Alex, and we can maybe throw one with the podcast, one of the things I found that works with Alex is to be vulnerable. to say to Alex, and think whether you think this would work for another human being too. You know, an ordinary human being under the tree that doesn't want to talk to you, and if you come to them and say, "Listen, Alex, I'm really, really sorry to bother you. I've been on campus for 2 weeks. I really thought I'd make a lot of friends. I haven't made any friends. I'm feeling really lonely. I just saw you sitting there. I thought I'd maybe just take a chance and talk to you." You know, when you say something like that to a person, their defenses are coming down, and you're basically saying, you have an opportunity to help me. You have an opportunity to give me something that's really easy just by being kind of nice to me in return. And it turns out Alex responds. So, you know, those sort of things will get him much more open, much more happy. And so that's the sort of notion, is that even that we don't tell people what to do, we say, just get in there, try some stuff, find some stuff that works for you, because what works for you might be different than what works for somebody else. But what works with these bots, we're pretty sure will work with human beings. And that's where all the research comes in now, is to make sure that human beings respond the same as the bots do to these things. But it's a nice mix of how, you know, our bots are so much more human because they're sensing emotion, your emotion. And I don't think anybody else is doing that now. And you feel that. We can toggle that on or off, and you feel like it's just become a little more real, a little more human than without it.
I would say this is definitely useful in just actual like romantic relationships too that people have, because if you see a lot of relationships that don't really work out, especially when it's the first relationship, it's because of the lack of experience that each person has to, like, you know, deal with. Exactly, like if the other person is feeling upset or something, the action to actually go and apologize or try to make them feel better. If we actually had like something like Alex to kind of teach us, okay, you acted really bad and hurtful, the other person got upset. And instead of saying, okay, you know what, like, I'm done with this, and because a lot of these happen in actual like real world relationships, then you learn to even maybe, like, you know, you could get feedback that, okay, now you treated Alex bad, you should probably go and apologize and make it up to him. So then they can apply it in real life relationships.
That's fantastic. That's exactly where we want to go. Like what we imagine, and what we're going to release today or tomorrow is just sort of, often with these products, there's this notion of what they call the MVP, which is the minimum viable product, which sounds really like shooting low. But it is kind of when you release something that works, has the vibe that you want, and then you start thinking, working with people who are using it, thinking how to make it better. And our roadmap for it certainly has one where you can explicitly see the emotions you're causing in the agent, because the agent does react to your emotions. And so you could see, you know, the moment, for example, that you say anything judgmental, and we're all like this. You know, the moment I say to you, "Why did you pick out that shirt?" Which I'm just picking on you, but immediately it's sort of a fight, right? It's just like, okay. And so judgment is just a really, and so to watch that, you know, to watch a bot just go, "Boo, I don't like you," or a spike, and it's like, oh, okay, I now realize the effect my words are having. So one is just to show them that, but the other idea that we have that's like what you said is sort of a rewind. The conversation was going really good to hear, but then you did some things and it went off the rails and it didn't go so well. Let's bring you back there and maybe try some different things and see if you can keep it on the rails. And so we can have things like that that really allow people, you know, to play and to kind of get a feel for it. And then ultimately, the critical thing is then they take that out of the Talk Lab, bring it into the real world, and hopefully see it. But I think it's fascinating what you said, because I just told you that I think many young people now don't have a lot of practice in this face-to-face real-time stuff. Part of that is you're not getting the nonverbals. You're not getting good at you're reading emoticons, where emoticons are not real nonverbal. Real nonverbals are honest. People just reflect in their face and their body how they react. And when you're not good at reading that, it causes confusion, and we often think the worst. Oh, they're not. Someone could be just interested. We might have said something, and they might just be. And what they're doing is thinking about what we're saying, and you know, which is sort of a good thing. But we might see that as disinterest or something else, and if we misread it, we're like, oh, this isn't going very well, etc. So if the first time you really have intense face-to-face real-time conversations is with some significant other, you know, you now have a boyfriend or girlfriend, and now suddenly you're chatting with them like you haven't chatted with other people, that's a minefield. You know, that's a situation where, yeah, you can say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing and react. And you mentioned another thing too, which is apologies. It's the lost art of apologies. That's the kind of thing you could learn in Talk Lab. Just like I was talking about vulnerability a moment ago with Alex, you could learn that you can bring a relationship back on the rails with a real, honest, heartfelt apology. And we don't see that modeled very much. Like political leaders and stuff and people that we admire, we don't see a whole lot of them give those real, honest apologies. And so I feel like not enough people understand the power that has, that we all screw up. We all make other people upset. We all say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing. We have the ability to say, man, I didn't mean to do that. I didn't mean to have that effect. I didn't whatever. And when it's authentic, you can actually build the bond stronger, through screwing up with each other a few times and getting things back on track instead of just blowing up and saying, oh, first thing went wrong in this relationship. She's pissed off at me. So I don't know what to do, so I'm just blowing it up and getting out. And it's like, you might have just lost something great, maybe.
Like a lot of times I could say that like one person would actually then like realize that they were wrong in a situation.
Yeah.
But the actual, like, as you said, like going and apologizing, it's really difficult for a lot of people.
Yep.
What would you say that is, and how could people actually work to improve that?
Yeah, we're not good. I mean, I always come back to this fight, flight reflex, and it's funny. It underpins so much of the work I do, and I think it's because we just underrate ourselves. So back up a little bit. I like to argue that there's two of us inside of our skull for every one of us. There's our frontal lobes, our sort of new, and this is the one we think of as us. These are the voices in our heads, all this kind of stuff. But the moment we feel threat, our limbic system gets triggered in, and that primitive fight-flight reflex kind of comes out. And that can be any threat. It can be a very light threat, like social embarrassment. Oh, I think they made fun of my, I don't know, hair or something like that. Or they just made some joke about my hair in front of her. But now I'm angry. I can feel that sort of more primitive fight-flight side come out. Learning to expose yourself, that's a threat, right? When you go and say to somebody, I screwed up, I was wrong, so you're just sort of presenting your own weakness to them, so to speak. You do feel open to, it's almost like a dog rolling and showing you their belly, so to speak. It's like, I'm open to attack, I'm showing you, but that's what makes it such a powerful thing. That's what makes it have that potential to, it has to be authentic to work. You have to mean that I feel sad and I'm sorry and I don't like what I caused by this. And when that authenticity is there, we don't see that very much. We don't see people expose a frailty of themselves in that way or a negative part of themselves. And that's what makes it powerful is like, oh, it's an intimate, it's a trust kind of thing to do. And let's talk about that a little bit too. I talked about the nonverbals and things. Social connection, the ultimate sort of way that happens is when we develop a relationship of trust. And we develop a relationship of trust with another individual when we share an emotional state with them and know that we're sharing an emotional state. So it can be something like, just imagine there was an earthquake right now, but you and I are sitting across from each other, staring at each other. We're feeling an earthquake. We don't know how bad it's going to get. We'd be looking in each other's eyes. We'd have our fight flight. We'd be like, kind of looking around like what's going on, and I would see in your eyes that you're feeling exactly what I'm feeling. And when that happens, when two individuals feel the same thing together, oxytocin is released, the neurotransmitter, and that creates a trust bond. So you and I, if there was an earthquake here, we'd see each other weeks from now, and we'd be saying hey to each other, and we'd be more connected because we went through that emotional experience together. This is why soldiers, stay connected for life, because they've been through intense emotional experiences. Sports teams that have won together, I don't know about lost together so much, but they become really bonded. And so when you're apologizing, if you're authentic, and you're like, I really feel horrible, and you really feel horrible, and that person sees that you really feel horrible, and then they have the empathy and they feel what you're feeling, and you see that they feel what you're feeling. That's an opportunity to really build that trust and take it another level. And it's an opportunity that many of us just throw away because it means exposing ourselves. It means admitting that we've done something wrong. And it's just, we're so hard. We don't want to, we're so worried about threats. We try to keep this exterior, and we're all alone in these exteriors instead of being together in a more human way.
Would you say there's a lot of biological factors to that too? Because I could be wrong, but men are probably more prideful to kind of take the first step, especially in arguments that, like, take the first step to admit they're wrong or try to apologize.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a relationship guy, so I'm not sure that's 100% when you're wrong. Are men more likely to apologize than women? Men are probably more likely to do something worthy of an apology.
That's another way to look at it.
They're more likely to mess up and screw up in some way in the first place. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I do think every now and then people mull over things like, what impact does social media have, and why does that make us, where we see everybody else seems to be living these beautiful lives and they're publishing all this positivity, and they have, relationships that look fantastic as they post their pictures of what they did on the weekend. And there's suddenly like, I have to be a perfect person. It's like we're all shooting to be these sort of perfect people that everybody shows everybody else, when in reality we're all not. But it feels like we've become more worried about hiding our imperfections. And getting behind this. Simon and Garfunkel have a song called "I Am a Rock," and it talks about this notion that a rock feels no pain, and that when you sort of get into that mentality of no, I'm not going to be touched by emotional stuff, I'm not going to be whatever. The whole irony of that song is the guy's sort of alone with his thoughts and with his whatever, but no one's going to hurt him. And I kind of feel like sometimes there's too much of that going on, that people aren't willing to let the screens down and say, here's who I am, warts and all. Here's the but I want to be a better person every day. But I'm going to admit that I'm going to not be the best person possible right now. I'm going to try, but then I'm going to learn, and that's just so hard. It's that growth mindset. It's back to Michael Jordan, and it's one thing a dude playing basketball, but it's something else when it's your life and you're trying to live your life well, and you have all these standards that are just unrealistic being thrown at you all the time.
Yeah, because at least in my opinion, one of the main reasons that we see the effect between social media and mental health is, as you said, like there's people like, posting their supercars, their mansions, vacations, whatever. And a lot of people looking at that not necessarily have that opportunities. They're like, okay, what am I lacking? Is it like, did I not try hard enough? And just comparing themselves with each other. And, we hear a lot of different like kind of quotes and such, that one of them I try to like sometimes like, tell myself and actually implement it in my life. But I mean, it's a hard task. But the one that actually like I really like is just saying comparison is the thief of joy.
Yep.
Which, I mean, if you look at it, it's if you just always compare yourself, I mean, you could be like, okay, it's going to make you try harder to achieve those stuff. But 99% of the time that you don't, it's just going to make you feel worse and just drag you down and definitely impact your mental health in a really bad way.
So the thing I've heard similar to that too is compare with yourself. Compare with you yesterday, or compare with you tomorrow. Like who's the person you want to be? Not compare sideways to these people on social media or whatever. Say, who am I now? And I recently heard this. I'm blocking on his last name. The Canadian astronaut Chris. Lost his last name. Saw him talk recently, and he's done all these spacewalks. Not Chris Hadfield. Thank you. Okay. And Chris talked about, I tried to get him on video. I got a chance to meet him. He was taking pictures, and I tried to get a video for my students, and he's like, I can't do that for you. I'd have to do that for everybody. I'm like, But he said he had some persistent unhappiness with his self as he was today, or something like this, all through life. He's like, okay, I have all these skills, I have all these abilities, but I want more. And he had this goal of walking in space. He basically wanted to do something that almost nobody gets to do. And he knew you had to be, have all these abilities. But he would say he would continually compare himself to himself of his past. And I think I do that as well. And when you do that well, you start to do that sort of multi-perspective. So, we can sit here and talk about AI and education and assessment. And I can talk about all these things I want to do. And I can imagine these things I have to learn to get there. But at the same time, in the back of my head is, my wife's retired, as we talked about before, and I want to be good in terms of being the husband to her with the life we have left as well. So how can I do this, but not sacrifice this? How can I move ahead both professionally, but also respectfully as a person, as a human being? And, I'm continually kind of looking at myself and noticing, especially when the balance gets out, when I'm working evenings and weekends all the time, I will always have to be telling my wife and family, listen, this is 2 weeks. I got to get through these 2 weeks, and then I will adjust the balance and I go back. And so to be aware that I'm not really being the person I want to be right now. And maybe there's a reason, but I got to get back there. And so I think that's more personal growth, is kind of thinking, where am I now? What am I doing well? What do I wish do I wish I could study better? Are there ways I could do that and get those better marks? And let me focus on myself and growing into the person I can become. But yeah, all that other stuff is just noise, and it just drives you. It makes you unrealistic and it demotivates. I think that's the question. If you end up being demotivated, then whatever that behavior is, you should try to avoid.
There's a lot of these talks with goal setting too, that some say you gotta set as high as goals as you can, so then you try harder to achieve those goals rather than something that's more realistic and lower, because you're only gonna work for that specific goal. Yep. Let's say in a context of marks in your course.
Yep.
It's saying, okay, if you're aiming for an 80, you're gonna only try for an 80.
Right.
But if you're aiming for 100, you would basically try for the 100 and maybe even do better than the 80 you wanted.
As long as it's realistic. I mean, that's the tricky thing, and I'll bring it to a different world. As I got older and I started worrying about the future, one of the things I learned was how important weight-bearing exercise is to the body. That once you get to be about 40, 45, you start losing your muscle mass. And if you're not counteracting that, you lose it pretty quickly. And by the time you're 50 or 60, you can be pretty frail. I didn't want to be frail when I was 60. And so it's like, okay, I want to bring in weight-bearing exercise, but I also have this career on the go. I've got a family. Where does this all fit in? And I've tried this a couple times in the past, and I think I've aimed too high. I've said, okay, I want 3 times a week in the gym doing this kind of stuff, and that's going to get me where I want to be physically. And I just couldn't fit it into my life. And I aimed too high. I wasn't reasonable, and therefore I didn't succeed in that goal and felt bad about it. I just stopped doing it. Sometime during the pandemic is when I actually was able to do this. And what I had to do was schedule Tuesdays and Fridays. I have a schedule where I spend time, and it's like an hour and a half in the basement. That's all I can do. A little bit of time on an aerobic machine, a little bit of weights. But that I can keep doing. And so I did that for 2 years. And it's like, okay, this is moving me ahead of where I was. So I think, sometimes that's the most important goal, trying to get a little ahead of where you are, and finding behaviors that are sustainable to get you there. And that's the only trick I would say with goal setting. If you shoot too high, now Chris wanted to be an astronaut from when he was 7 years old. So he shot that high right from the get-go. But I think there are also a bunch of sub-goals he realized to get there. Even, for example, the Chris Hadfield story, he joined the Air Cadets because he wanted to fly an airplane. So that was the first step towards becoming a pilot. And so that became a sub-goal that he could structure into his life by going to Air Cadets so many days a week and reach that goal. So that's the other trick, is not... Don't just look at the goal, look at the path, and what's a reasonable thing, a reasonable ask of yourself in terms of changing our behavior, because it's hard to change our behavior, and we have to succeed. So sometimes small steps towards a bigger goal. Yeah.
Looking back at your life and career, is there anything that you really regret doing or not doing?
I don't know. I'm not much of a backward looker.
That's good.
Which is kind of funny. Yeah. No, I can't say I spend a lot of time. I think my mind's always in the future. And there's you threw me out a phrase. There's a phrase that's been haunting me a lot lately, and it's from the Stoics. If you want good phrases, go back to some of the things the Stoics said. And the Stoics were about living simply but living well. And one of the phrases that they embrace, which actually goes back to Confucius, so it's literally a Confucius say kind of line, is that we all live 2 lives. The second one begins when we truly realize we only live one, which is kind of a confusing Confucius saying. But you get it when you're my age, which is you reach a point where you start to realize, and in my case, my wife and I, we like to ride motorcycles, for example, and travel big distances. How many summers do we got left? Like literally, how many summers do we have available to us to do that kind of stuff that our body will allow it? Mostly our bodies will allow it. And you start to realize you can count these on one or two hands or something like that. And suddenly the time frame seems much shorter, and you start thinking, okay, I want to live my life well for this, what I have left. And it really changes your whole mindset and how you're doing things. And so I think I've always got that forward mindset of what can I be doing professionally? What can I be doing personally to make sure that the years that we have left, I'm making the most out of. And I think I'm driven more by that than looking backwards and saying, what could I have done differently? I'm pretty happy where I am. I mean, I wanted to be a music producer. I could have loved that. There's no doubt. But I'm pretty happy. The psychology and technology, especially the AI thing that's sort of made so many's lives difficult. For me, it's like, oh, this is kind of cool. It's sort of blowing up education. And I like building things, and I like rebuilding things, and I like change, and I like progress. And so as horrible as it is, sometimes the best path to progress is some force that makes the old way not very good anymore. And now suddenly people are like open to new things. And that seems to be the environment I thrive in. So
would you call yourself more of an optimistic person then in terms of that?
Certainly, I went through the cycle with AI that so many educators did of like, oh my goodness, it's going to just wipe out a bunch of what we do, and that was the fear and the whatever. But yeah, I think I very quickly get to the opportunity. I have a very creative mind. I like coming up with ideas. I was going to pitch to Sam. We were both chatting with Sam the other day. Last night, this is just an example of my crazy mind. I got thinking, I'll give you the full length. Apparently, UT Scarborough is still the third choice of many people that come to U of T, which annoys me because I think UT Scarborough is cool and the best. And I love having someone like Sam get involved in UT Scarborough, Sam Ibrahim, because I think he brings that Scarborough pride that's really important for us. I think we should all have it. So I love that. But I was thinking last night, and this is how my brain goes, how could you take it to the next step? And I happen to know that Sam knows Drake. And I happen to know that Sam bought that basketball team because Drake was in it, and he thought, well, if Drake's doing it, I'll do it. Seems like all right. So, which in my mind is, oh, Drake kind of owes him. And so then I started thinking the Adonis Drake Center for Urban Arts. What if we had, and it just came out of nowhere, what if we had at UT Scarborough? I know that Drake, urban art is kind of his thing, and Adonis, his son, I know has some artistic kind of leanings. Could we get Drake to sponsor a center here at UTSC? And, that's just out of nowhere. But it's just these crazy thoughts like, I bet that would make us a little cooler. And I want to, before I retire, I'd like to see UTSC be the number one choice of U of T students. So I don't know. That's just the sort of crazy way I'm constantly coming up with ideas. And some of them come to life. Some don't. We'll see if Sam will bring that one to Drake. And
I mean, it's definitely going to be motivating for people because Drake's name is going to...
It does stuff.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Dealing with stress and anxiety, especially during these times that students are really in like a not really the best situation with so many tests, so many exams. Are there any techniques that you would say, like for example, like mindfulness that helps deal with these stresses?
So one thing I'll say, by the way, is that we have a new dean at UT Scarborough, and she's very much aware of this. And we've been having discussions, which is really nice. She knows about some of the stuff I've been involved in, we've been involved in, and she wants to do something that has an impact. So yes. So one of the things she said, she's basically asking me, can I package something that could be brought to students that could answer the question that you're basically asking? And there's sort of two steps to it. So first of all, just a basic understanding of the stress response, which is, again, back to, I tell you, everything comes back to fight, flight, and it is fight, flight. Anytime you have a threat, an exam is a threat. Bunch of exams are threats. Assignments are threats. Every one of them could be something you don't do well on. And that's enough to trigger your fight, flight. That causes cortisol and adrenaline to enter your body, and it makes you feel that sort of jittery kind of feeling. If that's allowed to persist, then we get into exhaustion, and we generally find people are not doing well. So it's like stress activates you to a point, But if it lasts too long, then it starts to hit you and you run into burnout, what we typically call burnout. And it sort of is from an I can to an I can't. You reach a point where you just feel like I can't do it anymore. I can't do anything. That's what we need to avoid. So how do you avoid that? Sort of two ways. So one is some of the techniques you can use around just trying to reduce your anxiety in a sort of direct way. And so you mentioned meditation, there's relaxation training. And so basically you cannot be both relaxed and stressed at the same time. There's sort of two different sides of a coin. So if you can learn some active ways of relaxing your body, meditation's one, relaxation, guided relaxation, you can go on YouTube, you can find guided relaxation scripts. That's another way. And if you can learn how to get your body into a relaxed state, this can almost become like a Jedi skill. When I talk to the police officers about this, it's like almost a Jedi skill where if you practice this enough and you get good at feeling the anxiety build, which is itself a skill, you have to work with others to kind of realize you're even acting anxious. Many of us don't know that. But if you can feel it and then you can use these techniques to kind of bring yourself back down again, then you can sort of directly, to some extent, control the anxiety reaction. But the other approach, too, is to realize that, okay, parts of my day, I have to worry about that exam. I have to worry about that assignment. And when I'm doing that, yes, there's going to be these stress signals coming in. But I need to get a break from that. And there's other activities you can do that are like medicine for stress. They flush the cortisol, they flush the adrenaline, and they fill your body with other positive neurotransmitters. That's like singing, dancing, laughing, social connection. You know, always we come back to social connection as a strong one. There's others. I missed it. But let's just, so for example, during the pandemic, I had a course and I recommended to families that they have karaoke night, once a week. And I also would jokingly say, you pick out the songs that your kids have to sing and let the kids pick out the songs that you have to sing. And so you're going to sing Nicki Minaj or something, and you're going to try, and you're going to butcher it, and it's going to sound horrible, and they're going to laugh at you, and then you're going to make them do Bob Dylan or something, and you're going to laugh at them. But everybody singing and laughing together is like three of those: social connection, singing, laughing. And if you can bring that together and just do that at a regular basis, that's like medicine. It's like flushing all those negative cortisols, and then you get to sort of start over on the stress response. So if students, use the clubs here, the gym, whatever, various opportunities that they have to get a break from the stress. So to say, okay, there's times I have to deal with it, but when I'm not, I'm going to do something that makes me feel good. And that might be going to a movie with friends. It might be whatever. I'm not going to feel guilty about that. I'm not going to feel like I should be studying. I'm going to say, no, this is my chance to escape that stress for a bit. I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to feel good. And then I can go back to it kind of recharged. So sort of those two things, the direct meditation, guided relaxation, but also the controlling how much you think about the stress and finding other things to do that give you a break from it.
What would you say for people generally, or just students too, that deal with these stresses with such a little bit stuff such as nicotine, alcohol, there's like overeating, there's also just sex itself, just these activities that especially like release the dopamine. There's obviously like not the best choices to like just escape the stress, but there's still a lot of it going on and people do it. Sometimes it leads to addiction. How would you say people can kind of like balance that out with
so I mean, some of those things you said, nicotine, for example, and even the overeating, if it's non-ritual based. So what I mean by non-ritual based, I mentioned this earlier, the best thing you can do going into exam period, almost starting right now, the best thing you could do is get on a very regular schedule and let your body know. And so you eat the same times every day, go to sleep the same time, wake up the same time, book your times to study, but book other times to kind of, escape it. And if you lead that really structured life, that's what's going to have your whole mind and body working at its best. And so best able to learn, best able to deliver at the exam. Anything you start doing differently at exam period, like drinking more coffee or eating more, or I don't know how sex fits in, I have to think that one through. But certainly, any sort of stimulant or whatever it's just messing with that ritual. You're not going to be able to get to sleep when you go to sleep, and then you're not going to have a good night's sleep, and then you're going to feel like you need to have more of that stimulant the next day. And so anytime you muck with the ritual, that's the worst thing you can do at a time when you want your body and brain going as
what if from now you just start like smoking or something? Yeah. Bring that in part of the daily habits.
So I mean, if that would be the alternative. Some people, for example, have what I call a thermostat approach to life. They wake up and they drink espressos, and then at 8 o'clock at night they start drinking whiskey, and that puts them to sleep. And so it's kind of like they're turning up the thermostat in the morning, turning it down at night. I mean, if it's what you do every day, then your body will kind of adjust to it and be okay with it, as long as it's not to excess, obviously, and any of those things. So yeah, you could say, okay, 5 weeks out, I'm going to establish my exam ritual, the kind that I want when I'm writing my exams. Yeah, that might make some sense. I don't know, but I wouldn't do it with the stimulants and stuff. I can't imagine. I'm just going to take stimulants to, generally speaking, all of those things. The important thing to realize about any chemo kind of approach is that when you take an external substance that does something, that has some effect, it's mimicking an effect that a natural neurotransmitter has. That's the only reason it works, because it's mimicking something. And when you have an external source, your brain very quickly starts to learn, oh, there's an external source of that, and it starts down producing its own.
So I shouldn't do it myself.
Yeah, and so that's where addiction, that's why you need more and more and more of that stimulant or whatever it is to have the same effect, because the brain's fighting against you. It's going like, no, I'll have less. And often you'd be better off if you just didn't muck with the system in the first place. Now you have this battle going on where you're trying to fight arousal levels, and you often don't end up winning anyway. And if you ever suddenly stop using that, now you feel completely non-alert, completely whatever, because it takes your brain a while to realize, oh, he isn't getting the external source anymore. I got to start producing my own now. And in that period, that's what we call withdrawal. That period is when you feel absolutely horrible, the opposite of what you're going for. So, that's the sort of roller coaster. When you hop on one of these, it's not just like something you can turn on for a while and say, okay, this is going to make me study well. And then it'll go off, I'll go back to sleep, and everything will be fine. The brain's very dynamic. And it'll like say, oh, you got that source? I'll stop producing mine, and now you're on a ride. Now you have to keep getting more and more and more, and it's really, it doesn't usually end well, and it doesn't produce better results overall.
I know exactly that's the case with people taking testosterone too, that, the body, exactly as you're saying.
At your age, people are taking testosterone?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Even like younger too, in high school, I've seen people taking it. I mean,
sometimes you see people my age. Sometimes people my age go to testosterone therapy or something. Oh, man.
Yeah, but I mean, like, the body goes like, see, okay, there's testosterone artificially coming in, so I'm not going to produce it anymore. Then you're going to see the effects from that, which is, I mean, it's really dangerous.
Now you need that external testosterone. Yeah. No, that's the kind of thing people should not be playing with.
Yeah, I mean, all that for kind of just like the physical appearance.
Is that what because testosterone also comes with, by the way, people higher on testosterone tend to be more violent, more aggressive, more like behaviorally it changes you too. So physically it might make you stronger, but behaviorally it makes you a little more of a jerk. Too much testosterone. We don't like people with too much testosterone generally. So that'd be tricky.
I mean, that's also just one of the problems that, more in the kind of US that like everyone's just kind of like throwing controversies, like just like there's a lot of different like mindsets. That like, the like with the hormone blockers with the young childs that they're saying, okay, like this is just going to have like lifetime effect on them. And
there's so much being done with bad information, like some of it's culture war, some of it's views about stuff, but so much of it's just bull crap that people have put out there, and now nobody can tell what's real and what's not. I generally, I'm in the psychology world where we sometimes differentiate between psychiatrists and psychologists and how they approach various issues, and psychiatrists being much more likely to prescribe drugs to solve some sort of problem. Psychologists not. And generally, I'm happy. Psychologists can't, because we're not medical doctors, so we're not allowed to. And I think that's one of the best things for psychology, because drugs seem to always give the quick fix that seldom has legs. It seldom carries through. So there's a place for it. If somebody's suicidal and they're intent on taking their own life, you're not just going to do talk therapy with them and make them better off the bat. So often a drug is needed, Prozac or something, to make them feel hope, make them feel that and then maybe therapy can kind of get in there and teach them better habits and stuff to make them happier long term. But the drugs are always like a short term fix that often has long-term negative consequences. And I get scared anytime anybody's thinking like Ritalin for ADHD, anything like that. When it's kids, I would rather see more of a psychological approach applied, more like try to retrain their habits, try to, help them kind of. I'll give an example in case I'm being vague there. Depressed people we know have a cognitive habit of orienting towards the negative. So if they go through a day and you ask them at the end of the day, what happened today? They will tell you all the negative things that happened to them. They just naturally pay attention more to them. They ruminate about them more. And there could have been just as many positive things, but they have this bias towards the negative. So how could you change that without drugs? To a psychologist, sometimes there's some simple techniques. And one of them is like, here's your therapy. We call it therapy. At the end of each day, I want you to send me an email. And in that email, I want you to tell me about 3 good things that happened to you today. That's all I want to hear about. Don't tell me about anything negative. I just want to hear about those 3 good things. And so now you're going through life and you're like, okay, I got this psychologist I have to send this email to at the end of the day. And as you go through life, maybe somebody's nice to you in the Tim Hortons line. And you're like, oh, right, I got 3 good things. That was kind of a good thing. Let me think about that a little bit because I got to put an email. How did that go down? And so now we're getting you to pay attention to the good thing and to think about it a little more. And then a little later in the day, another good thing happens. So you pay attention to that. And what we're trying to do is to shift this habit you have to only focus on the negative. And we're trying to give a signal to make you focus more on the positive, to kind of get more in balance. And if we can do this well enough, then you can start observing the negative and the positive, which is improvement, right? And so that becomes a habit that you can sustain through life, and you don't get the drug sort of effects of needing more and more and more of it or going on withdrawal. This is just a new way of living. And that's the more psychological approach to some of these things, that we get into these negative habits that can really attack our own sense of who we are and what we're about. But often they're just incorrect ways of thinking or doing things. And with some help, we can find a better path, a better way of being. And we don't necessarily need the drugs to get there.
That's amazing. Just to...
Can I give you one example? I just wanted to give you one example.
Please.
No, I just thought of this. So I know some students take a drug to help them focus when they're studying, because they feel they have to study well. When in fact, if they would turn off their phone, that would help them focus better than any drug. If you just turn off that thing that is continually sending you distracting messages, and if you disconnect it from your computer, if that's what you're using to study, so that all you see is what you're studying, that will do more than any drug you could take in terms of helping your mind focus on the material. There's this technique, the Pomodoro technique, that you can find out about online. That's basically all it is. It says set an egg timer for like 20 minutes, and during those 20 minutes, do just one thing. And that's all you're allowed to do until that thing goes bing. And when students do that, they're like, holy crap, did I get a lot done in that 20 minutes? I can't believe how. And that's what it feels like to avoid distraction. And it's more powerful than any drug can give you. And so, those are the things I wish students would think about more, instead of the quick fix, because the quick fix is never a quick fix.
Yeah, like one of these drugs, I don't know if you've heard of ashwagandha.
Yeah. So is that supposed to be the whatever you're addicted to? It can free you of addictions or something?
There's a lot of just like stuff that they say about it, but one thing is that it just like kind of like makes you not have like any emotions, basically. You basically like,
it's like a beta blocker.
Yeah.
That's what we would.
Yeah. Then you just like, okay, like kind of act like a robot and just go straight to it. And but I mean, I kind of would say most of the effects that it has on you is just the word
subjective.
No. It's more just psychological, that I can't think of the exact term for it, that you just, because like for example with Advil, like you think this
the placebo
effect. Yeah. Thank you. The placebo effect that it has, because like,
you took something it's supposed to do whatever. So I mean, another thing I wish students knew and understood more is Google Scholar. If there's something like that and you're wondering, hey, does this really help? If you go on the Google Scholar and you say ashwagandha study whatever it is you're trying to think you're going to use it for, and look at the scientific research. Like, don't believe what's said on social media. Don't believe that any more than AI. We're all pretty good at now realizing that AI just lies to us every now and then. And students are like, yeah, you got to be careful.
That's definitely the case with social media too. When you give like
all the time.
Power to talk to so many people at the same time to certain people, they just like say some crap and
they use emotion to trigger something that makes you want to believe it. Emotion makes our frontal lobe shut down, so we can't think very well. Yeah, go to Google Scholar. Say, is there any scientific research that actually show before I'm going to A, pay money, and B, risk my performance on exams by doing this? Let me just look at what the science says. And I think if students could get that habit, it's so easy with Google Scholar. Look it up and find the real science, or even use AI, but insist on your prompt. Give me, use something like Perplexity, because Perplexity is better than others, and say, what is the current science on that? And give me references. It may make stuff up. It'll probably get it more right than not, but at least do something beyond trusting what you hear on social media or whatever. Dig a little deeper, because quite often it's just crap, and you're going to save yourself a lot of time and energy by not following that. Do the Pomodoro technique instead. Yeah.
So thank you very much. I'm just gonna I'm not gonna take much of your time anymore, cool. And I just want you to end it with just one saying, one quote that really resonates with you, and maybe motivates at least one person listening to just do better.
Yeah, a quote. So I used my "You Only Live Once." Use that one up. What is a sort of man? So I think right now, where I am right now, the one thing I would really want students to understand is this power of social connection, and is the fact that if you feel lonely, if you feel isolated, and if you think you're the only one that feels that way, you're completely wrong. You're surrounded by people who feel the same, and an honest, authentic, outreach of, hey, how you doing? I was hoping to make more friends. Love to chat for a little bit. If you get a friend or two, it's going to make all the difference. All these things we're talking about, all these stresses, the friends buffer it. When our ability to kind of share our anxiety with our close friends really helps us bring it down, and it's better than any drug, better than any. In fact, it is the number one predictor of happiness. Of all the variables we found, the number one predictor of happiness is your social connection network. So invest in it is what I would say. Spend a bit of time, and there's easy ways. Join a club. Then you don't have to be face to face with the person right away. You can be part of, whatever that club's doing, badminton, whatever it may be. But you're going to be around other people. You're going to have something to talk about. Find a way to meet others and make a few new friends. That's the best investment you can make right now in your future success and happiness.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. I do appreciate it as well. That was fun.